Welcome to Utah Stories. There are some big cultural battles brewing in the Utah State Legislature, mostly between Democrats and Republicans. Most of these battles are about public education and what types of books should be allowed in K through 12 public libraries. So, on the right, a lot of people believe that there is a woke mind virus creeping in to Utah from California. They believe that books are being used as a tool to groom children into considering whether or not they were born into the right gender identity. Now, this is real in places like California, and it is something, and there's some horrific literature that actually seems to be a tool to indeed be used to get kids over-sexualized, and this material should absolutely be banned. So that's without question. However, there's a group called Parents United that have gotten statewide bans of books that include books that are really kind of gray area books that might be okay for teens, might be not okay. And to get into this topic, we are going to examine it with Utah State Legislator Carol Spackman Moss. But before we get into that, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, consider subscribing to our magazine and our website, which I'll give you details about later on in the program. I thank you so much for joining me. Without further ado, my interview with Carol Spackman Moss. Thanks so much for joining me, Carol.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you about these topics.
Yeah, you said you had a fun fact. Let's hear that first.
Well, after teaching 33 years at Olympus High, I ran for office, and I just kept running.
Yeah, 24 years.
And suddenly it was 24 years, and then I was told by the chief clerk who did some research, she said, "Do you know that you're now the longest-serving female legislator in the history of Utah?"
Wow, that's great.
And then I parenthetically like to add, not necessarily the oldest, but maybe
The longest running.
longest serving.
Longest.
And I'm especially proud because, number one, there are a number of men who've been in many more years. It's a part-time legislature. It's not like Congress, we don't make a lot of money and it's part-time, but 37 years, one senator, another 47 years. So anyway, so they honored me in the House and the Senate a year ago and invited family and friends that came up and surprised me and then had a lunch for me and read a citation in the House and Senate. So
That's cool.
yeah, I'm proud of that.
Well, I think the question that I would be fascinated to hear your take on is what is it like to be not only a woman, but to be a Democrat in the staunchly conservative, super, insular state legislature, which just feels like it's about as red of the red you can get.
That's true. Well, I want to add to what I said about being proud that as a woman I'd be in that long, but also as a Democrat.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. And so this is what I credit my longevity and ability to get elected in a district that leans Republican, and it always has. And I don't know, as far back as I can see, they didn't ever have a Democrat. But and how do I handle it? I spent 33 years in classrooms with teenagers. There's a learning
point.
Between 8,000 and 9,000 students. I taught English, sophomore, junior, senior, honors, junior, honors, AP for many years, AP English the last 17 years, and concurrent enrollment writing. I was student body officer advisor. I taught wonderful kids, and they're in positions of authority and success all over. They're in my neighborhood, and they're I see them at the store, at church, everywhere. And so, but the point I'm making is to get along with that many people over the years with different personalities, to have to get along with parents, administrators. It's all about relationships and trying to figure out how to best communicate to individual students and their learning styles and their personalities. So having all that experience, I have I am not intimidated by anyone.
Yeah.
Man, whatever party they're.
Who's harder to talk to, a rowdy teenager or a hardcore conservative legislator?
Maybe a hardcore conservative. I'm a short person. I have to look up to talk to a lot of men. I'm not in the slightest intimidated and not afraid to speak my truth.
Yeah.
And if they get in my face and they're rude, I tell them.
Yeah. So this whole book banning issue got national attention because, of course, if it's going to be a conservative movement, which the book banning thing has been, Utah's going to take it a step further. And we banned even more books than most other states. And so we got write-ups in the New York Times. And obviously, we've taken it very, very far. But you seem to have some insight in how this whole thing got started, which I didn't know. Can you explain that, how we opened this can of worms?
As I've thought about it over these last 2 years, when it first started, this business about challenging books and setting up committees and having teachers and parents review books, I started reading articles and read a few books. And it really goes back a number of decades, and it's part of the movement we called the school choice movement. And we've seen it manifest itself in Utah in the past two years, or a little bit longer, with vouchers. First time that's ever passed, so parents can send their children to private schools and use $8,000 per child, or homeschool their kids. And that all attempts in the past since I've been there have failed. And it included a salary increase for teachers, so that's how they sweetened the pot. But that passed, so $82.5 million without any accountability goes to parents who they can pay for their kids to take music lessons, martial arts, buy trampolines, and so on. Okay,
Really?
Mm-hmm. That's we could do another whole podcast on that. So what the impetus is, sowing distrust in public schools. Why would you want to pull your kid out of school? Oh, they have these books about LGBTQ kids, or they have books that you think are you've heard or have of a sexual nature. They're books about kids of color. There's a very definite pattern here. And so that's part of what I now and most people call the culture wars. Another part of it was banning DEI, any diversity, equity, inclusion. All our state universities and colleges had to eliminate all their departments and programs for everything from Women's Resource Center to the Gay Straight Alliance. And I think that's in high schools, though, and that I don't think that was part of it. But K through 12, school districts had equity, advisor, all that had to be done away with.
Yeah.
Given different names. So the book banning is part of it. And so it's so distrust in your public schools, get people to suspect that the terms they use are so horrifying to me, that teachers or librarians are groomers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
predators, all the worst words that you could ever say, pedophile, that just are horrifying to me. But again, the focus is on school library books, not so much the curriculum, although some of the books that have been challenged were on my reading list. There was outside reading the kids could select, not that I taught all of them 25 or 30 years ago. And the thing that's so troubling to me is Granite District always has had a book selection committee. If I wanted to add a book to that, we wanted to add more diversity in the authors, Chicano authors and Black authors, and not just the standard, white American classic writers. And some of those books now have been removed from the shelf in Granite, and they're awaiting further hearing.
Well, let's look at this from the other side a little more, because when I first heard about it, and I'm always a little bit skeptical. I'm an independent. A lot of times I read the Tribune and I'm like, okay, that's the left-leaning version of it, but what's the other side of it? And so I read how this particular author, Sarah Sarah J. Moss.
Moss, M-A-S.
Yeah, it was a bunch of her books and a bunch of her literature that they wanted to target. And she has some pretty explicit sex scenes where if my 7-year-old daughter were to pick that up and start reading it, I certainly wouldn't want that to happen. And I think that we do have a problem in our country with kids getting overly exposed to sexual material at a young age. So why couldn't it be just we take those books and put them on a different shelf and make it so that parents have a right to say whether or not the kid can check it out?
You got it exactly right. You answered what I was going to say. And all I know about Sarah J. Moss, and I've read about her books, is number one, I probably won't ever read them because they're fantasy and they're romantic fantasy. That's not a genre that I like. I don't like those books. And I posted an article from the Tribune about these 13 books that were banned. And I had a number of people say, oh, I've read some of her books, and frankly, they're pretty boring. But granted, in the first iteration of that bill, sensitive materials, where each district had to set up their own review committee, they said exactly that. They don't belong in junior high. I don't even know if they said they could be in high school. But age appropriate, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, just like movies. Some movies are definitely
And, there is a program, some districts have it, that if your kid checks the book out of the school library, you get a flagged a text or something that you could check this out. Not,
They already do that?
Some do, yeah. There's a vendor where they came up to our appropriations committee a year or so ago and talked about how they could do that. And some I don't know which ones, I think maybe Alpine, some in Utah County. So a parent can see what their kid's checking out. Let me just tell you what is the bigger problem. Kids are not reading today. And I'm asked to speak a lot in classrooms. I've spoken to high schools in the last year, quite a few. And it's down in Lehigh and Highland High here, Bonneville Junior. And I always say, how many of you, these are usually government classes or social studies classes, because I talk about how you make laws and so on. How many of you check books out of your school library to read just for fun and enjoyment? One hand, maybe two.
Yeah.
How many of you check books out to do research? A handful. Why? Because they do research online. But two, they're not reading. They're on TikTok. They're on social media. They're scrolling through Instagram. And I think the bigger problem today is that children aren't reading. But they have tried to criminalize this to the extent, and I remember one particular hearing, a Republican senator said, or I asked the question, I said, are you suggesting that you're calling this criminal porn, that if a librarian didn't immediately take a book off that was challenged, that you would send in a police officer to arrest this little elementary librarian? And he said, well, it's no different than if they were out on the streets handing out pornography. So the very definition that they use is called criminal pornography. And that is not an accurate. It's based on quite an old statute and Utah Criminal Code. If you want me to tell you about it, I can explain it different.
Is it members of the state legislature who just don't understand the definition of the word porn, who are conflating that with this?
I don't think they want to, because when I don't want to read the language, I could give you some of them, but it's quite explicit. But this is why it was really originally written in the code. It was to apply to public displays of art or performances. So it has to do with touching in the pubic region, and
You talking about the Supreme Court's definition?
No, not the Supreme Court, the Utah Code.
Oh, the Utah Code's definition.
So it was never intended to be for written literature.
Yeah.
So when I look up the definition of pornography, these are two of the standard definitions. When it's the sole purpose is to stimulate sexually, or the sole purpose is erotic stimulation. Now, I contend, and I said this in the committee, that The Bluest Eye, which we were discussing by Toni Morrison, it's a classic book. I said, what is it I knew what it was, but I said, what is it that's sexual in that book? And the answer I got was from the sponsor was, there's a rape scene. And I said, and you think that that's sexually stimulating? I mean, do you see what I mean? And here's another very popular book that's been on lots of those lists around the country to ban. It hasn't been removed yet. Officially, it's been one of The Kite Runner. It's a very popular book. It's about Afghanistan.
Yeah, I read that.
It was a bestseller, but so compelling. I learned so much about Afghanistan and the wars and what those people have gone through. And that's what books do. They expand your universe. You learn about other cultures and things. And yes, that was a violent thing, but that is a child. Well, it's not a child, can't read it. It wouldn't be reading it, the reading level. But a high school kid isn't going to be fixated on the sex part. It's not sex, it's violence.
And it's like, we live in a pretty insulated state where the first time I got to know my wife when we were dating, she called me Bubble Boy because I live in this little bubble, this Mormon bubble, and I'm not Mormon anymore, but you kind of don't get exposed to other things. And then when you get outside of it, you're kind of, shocked. And to think that we're going to insulate all these kids, and then maybe when they're 25, it'll be appropriate. Like, what age is it going to be appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing that really changed my mind on this issue is I went into Marissa's books, and she has a book ban section, a banned book section, and I see A Catcher in the Rye. And I read that when I was a junior in high school, and I absolutely loved that book. And that it totally expanded my mind and my thinking about how a person adequately adjusts to becoming an adult. Like he's just having this hard time becoming an adult. And of course, everybody at that age is, because you start to realize a lot of adults are phonies. And that conclusion, that realization that you have to kind of put on a persona as you get older, that was really super eye-opening to me. Yeah. And that they're banning it for what reason?
Right. I mean, that's just sophomores. And I gave this speech on the floor of the House about this book, and besides saying that it's the antithesis of local control, what we're doing now is that I taught when I was 23 years old. I was teaching sophomores, and the Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And the kids said, why would anybody burn books? So I told them about the 50s and McCarthyism, and, he was accusing everybody of being communist. And then, of course, the Nazis, book burning. And I said, it's 2024, and we're talking about destroying books because we're the only state that has officially banned books yet. The New York Times, The Guardian, and many, many news outlets covered this. And when I asked my school board member what Granite was going to do with these books, because they can't sell them, they can't give them away, and then what are they going to do? Burn them, shred them? And she said, well, we haven't really decided. For now, I think we'll put them in the surplus warehouse on a shelf.
What a joke.
I know, what a joke. And so when you say Marissa's books, I read that they did Barnes & Noble and Sugar House last year when I went and had a table of banned books, and she said, we can't keep these in stock.
Oh, really?
But
I guess that's...
Here's the thing that is so disturbing to me as someone, I have master's degrees in English and literature, and I was an AP reader. I used to present at conferences, but that's what any person knows that learns about how to read literature and study it and teach students is you don't take things out of context. You look at the entirety of the work. Does it have literary merit? And if they say, according to this law, sensitive materials, that if just you take the passage and it has something that fits that definition of, human genitals or touching or something, they don't have to read anymore. It's done. It's the red line. It's banned. And then there's the next category that you can look at the literary merit. And it's just, I think it would be overruled if we got a good lawsuit. It would be overruled. It's
So you're saying that there's two different categories of banned books. One is that it has just some basic explicit material in it,
and they
then they can take it out of
and all
context.
these
But the
parents-
other, you can examine it in the
Correct.
context and then
Yes.
decide if it's.
And so the parents from this far right group, Utah Parents United, Eagle Forum, they filled the.
Oh, it's
Really?
Eagle.
Oh, it's both of them. It's several, yeah. And they just look up those passages. See, they get those lists from Moms for Liberty, and they just look at the books and read those lines.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this to Sarah in the other podcast. There's this idea that there are, on the conservative side, that there are these groomers, that there are these educators who don't have their own children. They basically want to indoctrinate kids and teach them how to be trans or to be gay, and teach them that that's the greatest virtue. Do you think that concern has zero legitimacy? Do you think there's any kind of protections that could be put in place to I guess alleviate those fears that a lot of people have?
Well, again, they have to look at age appropriateness, and a parent. For example, the books that I taught, I only had maybe 2 parents in all those years that said they didn't want their student to read a book. One of them, ironically, was written in 1939, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, because that father had read somewhere that there was a hint of incest, which there probably was, but I certainly never explained it to anybody. But, if when I taught Hamlet and other Shakespeare, if I'd explained all the sexual illusions, have lost my job. Why do you think that people loved Shakespeare in his time? Because it had all these body, intimations of sexual connotations. Well, you don't talk about it, but it's there. So, a student is never going to turn gay from reading a book. And I've read some of those books that they object to. And after reading them, I know one about a trans kid, and I had my daughters read it. It was a graphic novel called Genderqueer. That's at the top of it.
Oh,
and graphic novels are different because you see a drawing. When you read something, it's in your head. And my daughters are voracious readers, and one I told you teaches AP and IB English high school, and this is what they all said, and this is how I felt. If you were a trans kid and you read this book, you might think, I'm not crazy. I don't have to die. There are other people that feel like me, that they were born in the wrong body. And if you're not, I have empathy now. I have a better understanding. I never understood what that would be like. And so I've had teachers tell me in certain schools that they've had young kids in elementary come and say, somebody said they have 2 mommies, or somebody said they have 2 dads, or, how can that be? And one teacher said, I read a book. There's one called Heather Has 2 Mommies, but they preface it with, every family's different. Some kids have a mom and a dad. Some kids only have a mom. Some have a dad. Some have a grandma that raises them, and some have 2 mothers. And that's part of life and reality. So why wouldn't you want to explain it to kids?
And I think there is a line where you definitely want to have kids understand all the different sexualities, and that there's different kinds of families, absolutely. But at what age or what level of freedom should you allow a child to read a book like Genderqueer? Because that's not going to be something, and should parents be allowed to chime in?
I don't think that book needs to be in the school library. Let's just put it that way.
I don't think so either.
I don't either. But if you know there a book like that exists,
and you're a parent, then maybe that should be your right.
They can go to a bookstore. Not all the books should be on school library shelves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think that's what could facilitate a good discussion between both sides. But it just seems like each side is talking past each other.
This is what people who read Sarah Moss books tell me, and including people that are booksellers. She started as a young adult novelist, and very popular, romantic, light, romantic, and apparently it's fantasy kind of stuff. But her books have gotten increasingly more sexual in nature. Like I said, I have no desire to read her books. I don't like that genre anyway, meaning the fantasy. And I just don't want to read those. But I think that they're probably not appropriate either. And so Granted had already made that decision. But there are other books, like Judy Blume books, and one of them on there forever. So I got it recently on Kindle, and I'm about halfway through. And my daughters all read Judy Blume books, and I never even questioned.
Yeah.
And I said,
it was for years.
Well, what sexual in them? And they said, well, she talked about sexual feelings and so on, and attraction and so on. And I said, well, that's good, because I never really told you very much about sex. And so, they weren't harmed by it. Everybody read Judy Blume books, every girl. And now I've been reading forever. It's a very tender love story. The girl's a senior in high school, and the boy she's attracted to is in college. And they start talking about having a sexual relationship. And her grandmother...
This is Judy Blume?
Judy Blume. This is Forever, the one that's on that list. And her grandmother lives in New York, and her grandmother's worked for Planned Parenthood for years, and she suspects that these two are in love, and, they're probably going to have a sexual relationship. And so she writes her granddaughter and says, you better have birth control, and tells her to do that. Okay, isn't that a sensible thing? Kids do have sex. Yeah. Teenagers... college,
not much you can do about that.
You can't do much about it, but wouldn't you prefer in a nice... And the book is tender. It's not sexually... It's not that yucky kind of, this is way too much. It's just... It really, I think I'd want my teenager to read this. And they talk, because her grandmother talked about, do you want to be a teenage mother?
Well, and the other point is, like, if you give your kid a phone, that phone is going to have access to the most raunchy, nasty stuff, porn, whatever. And if you're saying, I'm going to go on a committee to ban more books, but at the same time I'm going to let my kid have a phone, then you're a total hypocrite. Because how can you have it both ways? I think these phones are terrible. I think they should kick them all out of schools. Because
you're going to now.
I certainly hope so. It's looking to go that way. The Most Anxious Generation. We were talking about that book.
You're absolutely right. And that I've held my phone up in committees and said, if you're so worried about these books and the kids aren't even checking them out. And at my daughter's school, there was a book challenge about 2 years ago, and the librarian said to my daughter, I'm conservative, and I read this book, and I don't see anything wrong with it. And no one's ever checked it out. But my daughter just told me, school just started. They've got a new school up at Skyline, and the kids walk in, and the desk, they have a number on the desk, and it corresponds to a little cubby, and they slide their phone in there, and everything's fine.
That's great.
They just walk in and do it.
Awesome.
And this is going to happen all over the state. It's already happening. I'm hearing about it.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Oh, statewide ban. The kids, they're so distracted by their phones. They cheat. That's one of the things they do. They cheat. And even my daughter has very good students, advanced placement and they're good students. But if she'd say, just put your phones away, she'd see somebody leaning over after looking under their desk. And it needs to happen.
And I don't know if parents know all the statistics, but suicide rates of young girls used to be extremely low. Mm-hmm. And it's gone through the roof. It's skyrocketed due to social media and smartphones. Kids comparing their lives to other kids, thinking, "Oh, I'm not adequate. I'm not good enough. I might as well be done."
Well, and they're looking at their body image issue.
Yeah, it's a horrible,
beautiful, attractive, and young men and women,
and that's because of phones, and that's a real issue.
But
this is not. Kids don't read anymore. That's
what I was going to say. It's shortening attention span because you're scrolling. You're constantly getting fixes, so to speak. And a book, I even find myself in the years I've been in the legislature, because we read so many shorter things, briefs and so on, and bills and that and I used to read constantly. Even when I was teaching, I had papers to grade. I'd be looking for a new book to add to the reading list, or for my AP students, and I could sit and concentrate for a couple hours. Well, one reason I don't like to get Kindle on my iPad is that I'm constantly switching back and forth to see if I've gotten any emails or read the news.
Mm-hmm.
So I still prefer to read from a real book, although I supplement with audiobooks because it's forcing me to concentrate, and I'm losing that ability that I used to have.
I think that this whole issue is so tone deaf with what the problems of our kids actually are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have the highest obesity rates we've ever had. We have the highest juvenile diabetes, and kids aren't playing enough outside because they're glued to these devices and phones, and they're not interacting with each other enough. I'm noticing these young 20-year-olds we hire, they really feel like they've been sheltered. I'm sure COVID had something to do with that. But it's like it feels like you can't really say what you're thinking to them anymore because you're afraid you're going to hurt their feelings too badly or you're going to offend them. And it's like I don't think there's enough face-to-face interaction and discussion between kids. And I think that's completely, not a part of this whole debate. What do we do to get kids out of their house, interacting with each other face-to-face, reading books again? I mean, I'm glad you bring up all of those points about getting kids to read because the libraries are empty. I mean, kids are not there.
No, they're not.
It used to be, this is a funny story. One of the most memorable things about my library in my elementary school was I got into National Geographic, and every kid knew which National Geographic had the pictures of the naked-breasted women. It was the cover of the National Geographic. It was worn out. You'd open it up, and it's African women with, and it's like that was the book.
I was one of those kids because my parents took National Geographic,
really,
and I was
and I was we would look at that.
This is what this is but this is what we haven't even mentioned. When you tell a kid that something's banned,
oh yeah.
Then they're going out looking.
Yeah, why do you think TikTok's the most popular?
I know. I know. This just makes me laugh because they start hearing about Sarah Moss and any of these books, and they're going to go looking for them. When I was in high school, I call them pop boilers. They were these little paperbacks, and we'd say racy. Now this shows how long ago I was in high school, so we don't use that word. So there were girls that actually tore out pages that had these racy things that would probably be, and we'd pass them between class periods.
Oh, and it was
just those pages that had what we thought were, somewhat sexual, but they were probably nothing compared to it. But the point is, you tell kids that they can't do something, kids, let's get real.
Yeah.
So they're going to seek them out. But I continue to call it book banning, and they hate that because I often wear a pin that says I read banned books. And people always stop and comment and go, I do too. But we're taking away something really, really fundamental and to us, I think, is our freedom to read.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of speech, freedom to read, academic freedom.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a dangerous trend. And as I say, many parents have written to me and said, I have the right. I'm the one that should decide my kids' reading, not the government. And so there are a lot of parents out here that aren't thrilled with this kind of thing. And so, as I said, the sponsor has a following, and they're rabid. And if you
said the main sponsor,
Ken Ivory,
and he's got a group of people around him, and they're just hell-bent to just...
They are, there's porn out, but let me just tell you, they call it criminal porn to make it sound even worse because it's in the criminal part of the code. Now, I do think this, and I've asked some of the top attorneys.
Now, the Utah State Code, so what they're describing as porn, is that
in the criminal code?
That is in the criminal code.
It said if there is a description and it talks about, what specifically. I don't want to say it, but I mean, if I had it here.
So they don't want to go by the Supreme Court definition of
I don't even know what that is.
Sarah said it has to be explicitly and obviously intended to stimulate a sexual response.
Right. Well, that's what I told you when I looked it up. And I said...
Yeah, Rebecca, sorry.
That's exactly what I said in committee. And I said, is this rape? Stimulate anybody? Is it sexually stimulating to read an act of violence? I'm so dismayed by their lack of... And there's one woman that's the director, education director, that has a Facebook thing where she and Ken Ivory refers to this, rate my books. And she does that for a living. If you look on that website, it says donate, and she rates books and she sells stickers that have ratings on them.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, I know, but she's making money from this. This. Yeah.
I mean, I think that
Who is she to make the decision? But she doesn't have the academic experience.
Great book.
No, she's not
But that's where parents should be involved, just like the phone issue. You as a parent, you need to be doing parenting.
Well, movies have ratings, but who's to decide? She's just one of the group that decides, that says the things. She said awful things about books that I know have great literary merit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think you're not qualified to do this. And
well, I thank you for chiming in on this.
Thank you. It's the sad thing is that teachers and librarians are quitting, and they're afraid. They're afraid. Librarians have been harassed in Davis County. That one particular person, one of the individual I talked about that does that, she told somebody to call the police. A parent who said, "Well, they haven't taken the book out of the library yet," and she said, "Well, call the police." Davis County. Do you think the police want to go in and...
No, wait a minute. The parent was telling the librarian to call the police, or the
woman that's part of this following of Representative Ivory told the parent who was saying, "Oh, they haven't taken the book out. Call the police." Yeah. Do you think the police want to go?
Because they want to call it criminal porn.
Because this book's still on the shelf in the library in such and such a school.
And in the meantime, their kids are home with their phones, checking out.
Again, what are we in? Are we back in the 50s when,
Yeah, to me, it's really sad that we know, like this magazine, young people don't pick it up. They want to get all their information from their phone. That's it. Our demographic for the printed magazine is aging out. And that's really sad because I know you absorb more information from a printed page than you do from a screen. That's just proven. There have been a bunch of studies. And then we know you think more analytically and logically by reading words on a screen as opposed to getting all your information from video images and video clips. But is there any kind of push to try to get kids to read more books than to get away from video images? I haven't heard about that.
I haven't either. And teachers are finding it harder and harder to get kids to read. And they read, if they're highly motivated kids, they read the assigned books. But do they read for pleasure? My kids spent hours reading growing up. And I did too. We'd go to the public library and I'd come on with a stack of books, all the Nancy Drew mysteries. But my mother never once said, "Let me see what you're reading." I never said that to my daughters. I was just thrilled they were reading. We have a book club at my daughters and nieces, and we're still reading all.
Yeah, I feel really sad if we live in an age where it's a rarity for a child to read a book or for people to read books. It's just like it's got to be a bigger part of our society, because I think emotion and the distractions I think it's so accurate to call cell phones weapons of mass distraction, because it's just getting our kids away from what's important in life and to be able to think logically and rationally and have an attention span. So I'm glad you're a great proponent of that, and keep up the great work. And
thank you.
So 24 years in, you think you're gonna keep at it? You're running this?
I'm running. This is probably my last term. That's 2 years, but I'm looking forward to. I have things I'm working on, and people come.
And you represent Mill Creek and Holiday.
Part of Holiday, big part of Holiday, part of Mill Creek, and part of Murray. In this urban area, none of us just represent one city because, they're so close together. They blend into one another. But I live in Holiday, so that's the center of my district. But it's been an enormous honor and pleasure, and I've met so many nice people. I've been to thousands of doors and met people on the doorstep, and they share things with you, and it's really been.
Well, you're fighting against the gravel pit in Parley's Canyon. I'm happy about that.
And people's
great.
Everything from taxes to, but I always tell them I'm a teacher and was a teacher for many years, and I don't care if they have kids or their kids are grown or what, if they're grandparents, they all respond to that because they want their grandkids to get a good education, and they often tell me about what they think's wrong, but, they care about taxes and lots of things, but nobody ever brings up banned books, but...
Yeah, it's just become a hot button issue, and unfortunately, it's a culture war issue, like you said. And I think we should just develop different goals. Like, what do we do to get kids off of their screen and reading more?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that seems a lot more common sense. So, yeah. Well, thanks so much, Carol.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
All right, thank you so much for joining me on today's program. This program has been brought to you by Utah Stories Magazine. Go out, visit utahstories.com, and check out our brand new Halloween issue, which we'll send to you for $3 per month if you subscribe to the magazine. If you become a member at utahstories.com, we will send you Faces of Utah magazine, which is a book of amazing leaders and entrepreneurs in Utah that we've been working on for 18 months. This is a story about my friend who started a company with his father that refurbishes and remodels high-end Airstream trailers and vans. Incredible company, incredible story. We've got a story about Utah's Kyle Whittingham and his leadership capabilities in bringing Utah to the forefront of college athletics and football, and what he's been doing there to make his team such a great success. We've got all awesome stories. It's chock full of really great stories about businesses in Utah. So with your membership, $5, we'll send this to your house. Go become a member right now. And thank you so much for all of you who have become members. That's been extremely helpful to us into being able to pay our writers more money. That's what this is all about. Local journalism, investigative journalism, holding our leaders accountable for their actions. So with that, subscribe to the channel, but better yet, go to utahstories.com, subscribe to our membership portal. All right, I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.